Well, hello everybody. It's now time for part 2 of how to write formulas and names for molecular compounds. So here I have several examples, and I'm just going to show you what to do with them. In order to come up with the names of the molecular compounds, you will need those prefixes which were shown in the last video, and it might not be a bad idea to keep the periodic table nearby so you can look up names of elements should you forget them. So here we go. So here's a nice formula, N2O. This compound is made of 2 nitrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. So because there's 2 nitrogens, we'll put the prefix for 2 in front of nitrogen, and we'll come up with dinitrogen. And there's 1 oxygen, so we'll put the prefix for 1 in front of oxygen, and we'll get monoxide. So this compound is called dinitrogen monoxide. Now you might have noticed something, is that I do have the word oxide in here, which represents oxygen, but the prefix I added was mon instead of mono, which was shown in the last video. What's going on there? Well, often, in all cases, when you put a prefix before oxide, it is best to drop the vowel that ends the prefix. So mono became simply mon. You'll see the same thing happen in this example in a few minutes. If you don't drop the O at the end of mono, then you have something that looks like monoxide, and that's just weird. All right, next example, P2O5. You could call this P2O5, but if you were a chemist, you would call it something else. You would see that there's 2 phosphorus atoms, so you would say diphosphorus. And with 5 oxygen atoms, you would say, okay, let's represent 5 oxygen atoms, and let's use the prefix for 5, which is penta. We'll write pentoxide. Once again, in front of oxygen, the prefix penta has had the A removed and just made pent. Otherwise, it would be pentaoxide, and that's also a little bit weird. All right, last example, CBr4. What the heck is that? Well, if you were a chemist, you would look at this and you would see that there's 1 carbon, so you would write carbon, and then 4 bromine atoms, and the prefix for 4 is tetra, so you would write tetrabromide. Now, hang on a second there, Mr. Moffat. What happened to mono? Mono means 1. There's 1 carbon. Why didn't you write mono? Well, here's probably the only real rule that you need to remember. Excuse me. And that rule is that when the first element only has the invisible subscript of 1, we do not use the mono. That's right. And you probably all knew this already because you all know this compound from biology and elementary school. What is this called? Carbon dioxide. It has not been called, and you've never called it monocarbon dioxide. In fact, if you heard somebody else call this monocarbon dioxide, you might wonder who their teachers were. Okay, so this is simply carbon dioxide. Similarly, this is carbon tetrabromide, and that is the only rule I would say. Do not use mono for the first element ever. Only use it to represent 1 of the second element. Great. So naming molecular compounds is easy. Writing their formulas, I would say, just as easy. Let's slide this bad boy in here. Okay, here we go. Dinitrogen tetroxide. What does dinitrogen mean? It means 2 nitrogens. Okay, so I'm just going to go N2 for 2 nitrogens. Yeah, that's it. Tetroxide. Okay, that's the prefix. It means 4. So tetroxide or tetroxide must mean 4 oxygens. So I'm just going to put O4. And there you are. It's that simple. Wait a minute, Mr. Moffat. Shouldn't you reduce? No, you should not. We are not reducing. This substance, this name literally says 2 nitrogens. So we have to show 2 nitrogens. It literally says 4 oxygens. We have to show 4 oxygens. The name dinitrogen tetroxide does refer to a compound whose molecules look something like this. Each molecule is made of exactly two nitrogens and 4 oxygens. And therefore its formula should be N2O4. If you were to reduce this to NO2, well, then that would not be a good representation of this molecule, which I have drawn here. Another problem students sometimes have, or another mistake they make, is that some students get involved with somehow crisscrossing these two prefixes. And some students, I've seen this in the past, have written N4O2. Wrong, Ola. Sorry, that's not how it goes. We do not crisscross. The prefix prior to the name of an element simply describes how many of those elements' atoms appear in the compound. 2 nitrogens, 2 nitrogens. 4 oxygens, 4 oxygens. All right, what about sulfur hexachloride? Well, sulfur has nothing in front of it, no prefix written here, so that is the implied 1. So we'll just put S to represent 1 sulfur. And then hexa, what does that mean? That means 6. So that means 6 chlorines, Cl6. And it is, in fact, that simple, ladies and gentlemen. All right, then. Well, that's all I have to show you. If you need any further assistance, please send me an email. But for now, I'll say hand, which means have a nice day.